A teenage boy is slammed to the ground by two cops in broad daylight. No crime, no warning, just a hoodie, a backpack, and the wrong color skin. What they didn't know? His mother is the most powerful woman in the state, and she's not staying silent. Before we start the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from today. And if you like stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and tap the bell icon so you never miss the next one. The street buzzed gently with the sounds of a calm afternoon. A city bus hissed as it pulled away from the curb, leaving behind the warm scent of pavement and exhaust. On the sidewalk, Raymond, a 17-year-old boy, walked with his headphones on, a new set of guitar strings tucked under his arm, and his backpack loosely slung over one shoulder. His steps were steady. He had just come from the music store downtown, where he liked to spend a few minutes after school, browsing records and talking to the old man behind the counter. His mother was still at work, probably in court as usual, and he had planned to get home before she did, maybe make some noodles and play for a bit before dinner. He crossed the intersection near the bookstore, stopping briefly to let a family pass with a stroller. His hoodie was light gray, clean, his jeans slightly faded. Nothing about him looked out of place. But across the street, in a parked patrol car, two police officers were already watching. One leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. "You see that kid?" Officer Grant muttered. The younger officer, Officer Keene, nodded. "Looks like he's been circling the shops. Could be scouting." They didn't wait for any report or complaint. The car door opened with a quick click, and both stepped out. Raymond didn't notice them at first. He was scrolling through his playlist, pausing to pick a song. He turned the corner and started down the block toward the bus stop, just as the officers picked up their pace. "Hey, buddy," Officer Grant called out. Raymond turned, pulling out one earbud. "Yes?" His voice was polite, a little confused. "You live around here?" Grant asked, tone casual but sharp underneath. "I'm just going home," Raymond answered. "From the music store." He held up the small paper bag as proof. Officer Keene stepped closer. "Got any ID on you?" Raymond blinked, confused. "Did I do something wrong?" Grant chuckled. "Just a question. You look a little nervous." "I'm not," Raymond said. "I'm just trying to catch my bus." "Well, maybe you wouldn't mind if we checked your bag," Keene asked, already reaching for it. "No, sorry," Raymond said, stepping back slightly. "I didn't do anything. You can't just—" That was enough. Grant's face tightened. "Stop resisting." "I'm not resisting," Raymond replied quickly, hands slightly raised. "I didn't do anything." But it didn't matter. Grant grabbed his wrist. Keene reached for the backpack. Raymond tried to pull away, instinct more than aggression. That's when they pushed him, first against the wall, then down to the ground. A few people on the sidewalk stopped. Someone pulled out a phone. Raymond's cheek hit the sidewalk, scraping skin. His backpack slid away. The small bag with his guitar strings crumpled beneath a boot. "Possible theft suspect. Male, black, late teens, resisting. We need transport," Grant said into his radio. From across the street, the music store owner, Mr. Avery, had stepped outside. "He didn't steal anything," the old man called out. "I sold him those strings. I know him." "Back inside, sir," Officer Keene snapped. Raymond's voice was trembling now. "Please," he said. "You don't know who my mother is." Grant leaned in closer, pressing harder on the cuffs. "Oh yeah? Who is she? Beyoncé?" Laughter. Silence from the bystanders. And Raymond, now quiet, laying flat on the sidewalk, said nothing more. Across town, the tall glass windows of the courthouse caught the soft gleam of the late sun as it dipped behind the skyline. Inside one of the upper courtrooms, Leona, the state's attorney general, stood behind the prosecutor's bench, her voice sharp, steady, and certain. She was known for her calm fire, never raising her voice but always commanding the room. Today she was arguing a motion against a private security firm accused of tampering with evidence in an ongoing civil suit. Her delivery was clean. Her facts were precise. The judge listened closely, as did everyone else in the room. Leona had built her reputation on being relentless in her work, but quiet in her life. She rarely spoke about her son to colleagues. She kept her private world locked away from her courtroom, but there was no hiding the pride in her eyes whenever someone mentioned Raymond's name. Honor roll, debate team, music scholarship prospects, and most of all, good-hearted, the kind of boy who never gave her trouble, who checked in every afternoon, always with a soft, "Hey, Ma, you okay?" She had just finished her statement when her assistant clerk stepped into the back of the courtroom, motioning silently. It wasn't the usual kind of signal. Something was wrong. Leona caught the look in his eyes immediately. Without speaking, she approached the bench and respectfully requested a brief recess. The judge agreed, sensing the shift in tone. Outside the courtroom, Clark spoke in a low voice. "Your son's been picked up." Leona's eyes narrowed. "Picked up? What do you mean?" "Arrested. 2 officers brought him in about 20 minutes ago. Said something about resisting arrest. Shoplifting accusation, but—" He paused. "There's already video, witnesses, people filming. It's already on social media." Leona didn't blink. She just breathed once, slowly, and asked, "Which precinct?" "8th, same district where Officer Grant is stationed," Clark said quietly. She didn't ask any more questions. She turned, nodded once, and walked quickly down the hall. Her steps didn't echo, but the tension in the air did. Raymond sat on a hard bench in the corner of the precinct's holding area. His wrists still burned from the cuffs, now removed, but the red marks remained like reminders across his skin. He kept his head down, trying to steady his breathing. The officers had said nothing to him since dragging him into the building. They had tossed his bag aside, dumped his pockets, and then left him sitting there like a threat without a name. Across the room, Officer Grant leaned against the wall, arms folded, smirking. "Another one who thinks the rules don't apply," he muttered to Keene, who stood near the desk, tapping out a report slowly. "Got mouthy, got smart. Now look at him." Keene didn't respond. He looked a little unsure now, casting occasional glances toward the surveillance camera in the upper corner of the room. "Store clerk said he didn't steal anything," he said finally, his voice lower than before. Grant scoffed. "They always say that. If we waited for charges to be perfect, we'd never get anything done." He resisted. "That's enough." Raymond didn't look at them. He was focused on the floor, counting the cracks in the tile. But inside, his chest was tight. His mother would be worried. She always made him text when he got on the bus. She always checked the location of his phone when he was out too long. That thought made him wince. His phone. One of them had stomped on it. He had heard the screen crack beneath the officer's boot like a snap of bone. Behind him, another voice echoed from the far cell. A boy a little older, wearing a torn hoodie, leaned forward. "You don't belong here," the boy said quietly. "You're not one of us." Raymond glanced at him, confused. "What?" "You're the guitar kid, right? I seen your face on the school paper. You're smart. So why you sitting here with your hands all bruised up?" Raymond didn't answer. His throat felt tight again, not because of guilt, but from something worse. Shame. The kind that creeps in when you're being punished for nothing and everyone around you pretends it's normal. From the hallway, footsteps approached. Loud, measured, like someone walking with purpose, not permission. The door opened fast. A supervisor tried to step forward, but the woman who entered didn't pause. Leona's eyes scanned the room once, sharp, cold, and landed on her son. He stood slowly. "Mom," he said, voice cracking. Grant looked up, surprised and then amused. "This your mother?" Leona didn't respond. She looked directly at the officers. "Who's in charge here?" "I am," Grant replied, straightening his posture. "And you are?" She stepped forward. "State Attorney General." Silence. Even the hum of the overhead lights seemed to hold its breath. Grant blinked once. His mouth opened slightly, as if trying to find a word that didn't feel suddenly too small. "You're— what did you say?" Leona pulled out her badge and placed it firmly on the desk between them. The gold seal caught the light. "I said I'm the state attorney general," she repeated, "and that boy is my son." Keene took a quiet step back. His hands dropped to his sides. The sound of papers shuffling on the desk stopped. A young officer in the corner stood frozen, eyes wide. Grant, still trying to recover, straightened his back. "Ma'am, I didn't realize—" "No, you didn't," Leona cut in, her voice calm, cold, and controlled. "Because if you had, you might have thought twice before putting your hands on a minor without cause. There was a report." Grant tried again. "No, there wasn't," Leona interrupted. "I checked dispatch logs on my way here. There was no call." No theft reported, no suspect description matching my son. You profiled him." Grant's lips pressed tight. "He resisted. He refused an illegal search," Leona corrected. "That is not resisting. That's knowing his rights." Keene looked down at the floor. He didn't speak. Leona turned to her son. "Are you hurt?" Raymond nodded slightly. "I'm okay," he said softly. "Take his things," she told Clark, who had followed her in and now stood by the door. "What's left of them?" Clark picked up the crushed phone and handed it to her. Leona stared at it for a long second, then placed it in her bag without a word. Grant tried to recover his ground. "You have to understand, it's been tense lately. We're under pressure out there. A lot of these kids—" She stepped forward, and this time her voice sharpened. "Don't finish that sentence. You assaulted an unarmed child, lied about a report, and mocked him while he was face down on the pavement." Her eyes didn't leave his. "You think that badge gives you power, but it only gives you responsibility. And today you failed it." Grant looked like he wanted to speak, but no words came. Keene had gone pale. The room stayed silent. "I want every second of that body cam footage," Leona said. "Unedited, with audio. We're required to process that through." "No," she said flatly. "You're required to follow the law, and I am the law in this state." Raymond stood behind her now, no longer slouched, no longer quiet, just waiting. Leona turned back to Clark. "Call my office. Tell them to prepare a formal inquiry. I want both their records, every complaint ever filed, pulled before morning." Grant finally spoke again, his voice lower. "Ma'am, if I may—" She stopped him with a look. "You may not." Then she turned to her son. "We're leaving." Leona walked out of the precinct with Raymond beside her, her hand resting lightly on his back, not to guide him, but to remind him that he wasn't alone anymore. Her heels clicked sharply against the pavement, each step filled with the kind of calm that came just before a courtroom thunderstorm. Clark followed behind them, already on the phone, his voice low and urgent. The air outside felt different, heavier somehow. The people near the station entrance glanced up as she passed, as if they could feel it too. The shift in balance, the silent storm forming behind her eyes. In the car, Raymond sat quietly in the passenger seat, staring at the cracked screen of his phone. His reflection, broken across the glass, looked smaller than he remembered. He held it in his hands like it might still work if he pressed the right button hard enough. "They didn't even tell me what I did," he said after a long silence. "They just came at me." Leona didn't respond right away. Her eyes stayed on the road, her jaw tight. Then, in a voice so calm it almost sounded like a whisper, she asked, "Did you raise your hand at them?" "No," he said quickly. "I didn't touch them." "Did you curse?" "Number, I just asked why." "That's it." She nodded once, still watching the street ahead. "That's what I thought." Raymond looked over at her. I told them they didn't know who my mom was." She glanced at him. "And now they do." He gave a tired laugh, but it faded fast. They laughed. One of them said, "Maybe you were Beyoncé." That made her blink. Her mouth twitched, just slightly, but the smile never formed. "They thought it was a joke," she said. "They're not laughing anymore." Raymond leaned his head against the window, watching the city blur past. "I don't want this to be a story about me." "It's not," Leona said. "It's going to be a story about them." Back at her office, the building buzzed with activity. Assistants and legal staff were already moving, pulling files, reviewing tapes, coordinating with media advisors and policy staff. Clark had forwarded the precinct's internal logs to the records team, and a legal analyst was going through the city's misconduct database, flagging any officer with repeated racial bias complaints. Inside her office, Leona opened a secured laptop and began drafting a press statement. But after typing a few lines, she stopped. It didn't feel right. Not yet. Not with only her voice. This wasn't about her reputation or even her role. This was about proof, and proof needed more than words. She turned to Clark. "I need everything from that precinct. The video from their body cams, their internal reports, the surveillance from the holding area." "We requested the body cam footage," Clark said, "but they already released an edited clip to the press. 60 seconds, no audio." Leona looked up. They moved fast. Yes, too fast. And the original footage? They're claiming it's still under review. Might take days. Her eyes darkened. Then we won't wait. Get me someone who knows how to recover what they tried to delete. I have a contact, Clark said. He used to work cyber forensics. Quiet, careful. Bring him in. As the office kept moving, Leona stood at the window, watching the city. Her city. She had spent years cleaning corruption, rebuilding trust between the public and the justice system. And now two officers, two careless, arrogant men, had dragged her son into the mess she had fought her whole life to fix. She wasn't going to let it end with a silent apology. This wasn't going to be handled quietly, tucked away behind desk memos and half-hearted retraining sessions. They had humiliated her son, lied in their reports, bent the truth before anyone could catch them. Now it was her turn to set the record straight, not with revenge, but with exposure, with the truth, uncut and undeniable, and she was just getting started. By the next morning, the story had already started to spread, not because Leona gave a statement, but because someone had captured the moment Raymond was slammed against the sidewalk. The video was shaky, taken from across the street, but it was clear enough. It showed Officer Grant gripping Raymond's arm. It showed the struggle, the shove, the sound of him hitting the ground. And then it showed Grant leaning in, smiling as he barked something just out of earshot. The video didn't need high definition. It had something louder: truth. Uploaded by a college student named Yuri, the clip reached over 200,000 views before noon. The caption read, "He bought guitar strings. They arrested him anyway." People began sharing it, commenting, arguing. A few tried to say Raymond should have complied faster, that he must have done something. But those voices were buried under the thousands who saw what it really was. Another black teenager targeted for nothing but standing in the wrong place with the wrong skin. Leona sat behind her desk, watching the video on mute. She had already seen it 10 times. She didn't flinch at the moment he was taken down. She didn't blink at the sound of him pleading. She had no tears left to cry over it. What filled her chest now wasn't sadness. It was focus, precise and cold. Across from her, Clark updated her on the latest findings. We pulled Officer Grant's record: 6 citizen complaints, 3 for excessive force, 1 for harassment, 2 for racial profiling, all closed, all cleared internally. She folded her hands. Keen? Less, but still enough. 2 complaints, both dismissed, no follow-ups, but the patterns match. Mostly young males, mostly black or Latino. Always in quieter neighborhoods, always vague reports. And the precinct? Clark paused. They've had issues. 3 years ago, a similar case got buried. No press, no action. But it was the same setup. A kid walking home from tutoring stopped for acting suspicious. He ended up with a broken wrist. Leona's jaw tightened. Who handled that case? Same lead officer. Grant Shee stood and walked to the whiteboard now mounted in her office, where a growing list of names, dates, and clipped reports had begun to form a timeline. The board looked like something out of a war room, because that's what this had become. Not just a case, a pattern, a design. Clark tapped the tablet in his hand. Our forensic contact, Reese, just checked in. He's inside the precinct server. He pulled a temporary backup file. Says the footage was cut intentionally. Audio tracks were split and silenced. Metadata shows the edit happened 2 hours after the arrest. Leona turned sharply, which means someone in that department authorized it. Clark nodded. Or did it themselves. She didn't hesitate. Call Reese. Tell him to isolate the original timestamp. I want every missing second recovered. And get that footage on an encrypted drive. No cloud storage. Already done. He's cleaning up the file now. She picked up her phone and called the Public Integrity Unit. This is Leona, she said, her voice steady. I need a formal misconduct review opened. 8th Precinct. Officers Grant and Keene. Effective immediately. They tried to bury the truth. But the thing about trying to silence a mother whose entire career was built on exposing corruption was that it never worked for long. 2 hours later, a second video surfaced. This one from a nearby cafe's outdoor security camera. A wider angle. It caught the entire moment from when Raymond was first approached to the second the officer slammed him into the concrete. It captured bystanders yelling, trying to intervene. It captured the moment Mr. Avery, the music store owner, ran forward shouting, "He didn't steal anything." It was enough to erase any doubts left in the public's mind. Hashtags exploded across platforms. Justice for Raymond. He did nothing. Unlawful stop. And most notably, number she is the Attorney General. Reporters began camping outside the precinct. News vans parked across the street. The story had gone national. And yet, inside the station, the silence was deafening. Officer Grant stood in the hallway, staring at the TV in the break room as his own face filled the screen. The footage looped again and again. His voice wasn't heard, but the smirk on his face spoke louder than words. Keene entered slowly, holding his phone like it had just burned him. "They know everything," he said. "The footage, the report. They're saying it was edited." Grant's fist clenched. "This is political." "It's not political. It's not political," Keene said, barely above a whisper. "It's real. They're turning it into something bigger." Keene looked at him, a shadow passing over his expression. "Maybe it was already big. We just never paid attention." Down the hall, the precinct captain slammed the door shut and shouted for an emergency meeting. Outside, the crowd was growing. And in her office, Leona stared at her son's photo. One from last year, when he won the city's Youth Music Award. He was holding a guitar, smiling, wearing the same hoodie he wore the day before. She picked up a flash drive from her desk and slipped it into an envelope. Then she wrote 2 words on the label. Unedited proof. The precinct lobby had never been this quiet, not even during officer briefings or city audits. It wasn't just the presence of reporters outside or the calls flooding in from City Hall. It was something heavier. Something none of the officers wanted to say out loud, but all of them felt. Fear dressed as silence. Officer Grant stood behind the glass window of the supervisor's office, arms crossed, refusing to sit. Across from him sat the precinct captain, a man named Rogan, with a worn face and tired eyes. Rogan had seen protests, lawsuits, internal affairs crawling through the department like termites, but this was different. This wasn't just a mistake that could be explained away. This was a spotlight, and it wasn't moving. "Do you know what you've done?" Rogan asked, his voice low but thick with tension. Grant scoffed. "I did my job. Kid was uncooperative. Matched the description." "There was no description," Rogan snapped. "There was no report, no call, no complaint. The store manager confirmed the purchase. And now we have 2 videos. 2 showing you taking down a minor for nothing. And you smiled. You didn't even look nervous." "He was resisting." "He was asking questions." Grant stayed quiet. "Then someone," Rogan continued, his voice lowering, "either you, your partner, or someone in that building, edited the footage before submitting it to evidence." Grant said nothing. "You know who his mother is," Rogan added, leaning forward now. "You know exactly who she is. The state attorney general, which means you didn't just attack a kid. You challenged the law itself." "She's using this," Grant said bitterly. "She's weaponizing it, turning it into a media stunt." "No," Rogan replied, his voice flat. "You turned it into something. She's just holding up a mirror." Across town, Leona sat in a small conference room at a public media studio. She hadn't intended to speak publicly so soon, but the second video had changed the landscape. The footage was now undeniable. Edited and raw, side by side. Thousands had seen it. Millions had opinions. And most importantly, victims from previous cases had begun coming forward. She had already received 6 emails and 2 direct calls, all from Black or Latino men in their 20s, most with no criminal record, each with nearly identical stories, stopped while walking, accused of things they didn't do. One had his license ripped in half on the spot. Another was told to stop acting like a lawyer when he questioned a search. All of them remembered the name, Grant. Leona adjusted her blazer, took a breath, and walked into the recording room. The interviewer greeted her, trying to keep things light. She didn't return the smile. Once the cameras rolled, the first question was simple. "Can you tell us what went through your mind when you learned your son had been arrested?" She looked at the camera, not the reporter. I thought about how many other mothers didn't get the chance to walk into that precinct and get their child out. Do you believe this was racially motivated? I don't believe it, she replied. I know it. The interviewer blinked, caught off guard by the certainty. Leona continued. My son wasn't doing anything wrong. He was walking with guitar strings in his hand. But he was also walking with brown skin in a wealthy zip code. And that's all it took. The interviewer tried to pivot. Some critics are saying your position gives you an unfair advantage. Leona cut in, her voice steady. My position gives me access, not protection. My son could have been killed. If that knee had gone higher, if that pavement had been sharper, if someone's finger had slipped on a trigger. And then all you would have seen is a police report and a headline calling him uncooperative. There was a pause, silence on the set. The producer off camera signaled to keep rolling. Leona glanced down at the table, then back at the camera. What scares me isn't what happened to my son, she said. It's that everything they did to him, they've done to others before. And no one listened. Until now. When the segment aired that evening, it wasn't clipped or shortened. It ran in full, uncut, across 3 local networks and then online. The interview was raw. No dramatic music. No special lighting. Just a mother, a prosecutor, a witness to a truth too many had learned the hard way. That same night, another video emerged, body cam footage leaked by an anonymous officer from the same precinct. It showed Officer Grant laughing after Raymond's arrest, turning to Keene and saying, "They always fold once you get the cuffs on." The timestamp matched the moment after they left the sidewalk. The video hadn't been part of the official file, and just like that, it spread, uploaded on a dozen channels, watermarked with the word unsilenced. Within an hour, the precinct was surrounded, not by angry mobs, by news vans, reporters, protesters holding candles and signs, by people who had stopped believing the lie that silence was the same thing as peace. Inside the precinct, Officer Keene sat in the locker room, staring at the floor. His hands trembled. Grant barged in, still fuming, muttering curses. They're throwing us under the bus. This whole thing's political. Keene didn't respond. Grant snapped, "Say something, man." Keene looked up. "It wasn't supposed to go that far." Grant's mouth tightened. "You knew the game." Keene stood slowly. "Yeah, and I think I finally won out." And somewhere across the city, Leona opened her laptop. A new message blinked on screen. Subject line, "It happened to me too. I'm ready to talk." She clicked it open and kept reading. The next morning began with rain. Soft at first, then steady. It tapped against the windows of Leona's home like a quiet warning. She sat at the kitchen table, hair still wrapped in a towel from her early shower, a mug of black coffee untouched in front of her. Across the table, Raymond was flipping through his textbooks, pretending to study, but his eyes kept drifting back to his phone. The video of his arrest had now crossed 4 million views. His name was everywhere, but none of the posts felt real to him. It wasn't just a story anymore. It was his story, but told by strangers, passed from feed to feed, like a badge he never asked for. Leona noticed. "Turn it off," she said gently. "At least for today." Raymond nodded, but he didn't. "They're saying I should speak. Go on camera. Give a statement." She looked at him. "Do you want to?" "I don't know," he admitted. "Part of me wants to say something, and another part just wants to disappear." She reached over, placed her hand on his. "If you speak, do it because you have something to say. Not because they want a soundbite." Outside, the streets were already crowded. Protesters had gathered in front of City Hall, holding signs with Raymond's face, calling for Officer Grant's suspension and demanding answers from the precinct. People from every part of the city had come. Teachers, students, ministers, lawyers, even children with raincoats and hand-painted signs. The message was clear. This wasn't going away. At the 8th precinct, the atmosphere had shifted from tension to panic. Officers shuffled between desks, unsure who to trust. A group of detectives had been pulled off their cases and reassigned to internal documentation. The Internal Affairs Unit had taken over the West Conference Room. Every shift change now included a warning. Don't speak to press, don't post, don't speculate. But it was already too late for that. The press didn't need speculation. They had footage, timestamps, contradictions, and now, thanks to the anonymous leak, audio. Keene sat in his cruiser during his lunch break, staring at the raindrops on the windshield. His radio crackled with routine calls, but he didn't move. His badge felt heavier than usual, not from the metal, but from the weight of what he hadn't done. The moment Grant went too far, the moment Raymond hit the ground, Keene could have stopped it. He could have said something, pulled Grant back, stepped between them. But he hadn't. He froze. And now the silence he chose was screaming in his ears. His phone buzzed. A single message from an unknown number. "You were there. Speak up before someone else speaks for you." He stared at it for a long moment, then reached for his glove box, pulled out a notepad and started writing. Across the city in a small, cluttered apartment above a pawn shop, Reese, the cyber forensic expert Leona had hired, was finishing the recovery process. The footage from the body cam had been tampered with in layers. Audio separated, timestamps shifted, file names masked. But Reese had seen worse. His hands moved quickly, eyes scanning lines of code as he reassembled what the public was never meant to see. In the recovered footage, just moments after Raymond was cuffed, Officer Grant could be heard clearly whispering to Keene, "Kid's too clean. Let's shake him a little. Get something on the record." Then the fake call went out. "Possible shoplifting suspect, matching description." Reese copied the file to a secure drive, sealed it in a package, and texted Clark, "We're done. It's solid. Tell her I've got it." That same hour inside the Attorney General's office, Leona met with a small team of civil rights lawyers, activists, and 2 state senators. The goal was no longer just to hold Grant accountable. It was bigger than him now. This was about policy, precedent, and power. One of the lawyers, Arjun Desai, tapped the edge of his file. "We've got enough for federal review," he said. "Between the edit, the false report, the physical force, and the leaked audio, this isn't just misconduct, it's systemic." The senator beside him nodded. "We file for a full public safety audit on the precinct. Use this to push legislation on stop-and-search reforms, mandatory body cam transparency, civilian oversight expansion." Leona looked at the table, then at the names of the others who had written in. The young man from 2 years ago, the teacher pulled from her car during a night stop, the high school sophomore detained for walking through his own neighborhood. She closed the file gently. "We don't just push for new rules," she said. "We make sure the old ones stop being ignored." Later that evening, Raymond sat at his desk at home, a sheet of music in front of him, untouched. The guitar rested in his lap, but his hands were still. The melody he had been writing days ago no longer felt right. Nothing did. His fingers hovered over the strings, then dropped. He turned to the window and saw a woman across the street holding a sign in the rain. "We believe you, Raymond." He didn't know her name. She didn't wave. She just stood there, letting the rain soak her clothes and blur the ink. Something shifted in his chest. He walked into the living room where Leona was finishing a call. "I want to speak," he said quietly. She turned. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "Not because they want me to, because I need them to know I'm more than what he tried to make me." She didn't smile, but her voice softened. "Then say it loud." And somewhere downtown, Officer Keene sat in the back seat of his own cruiser, notebook in hand, waiting for an internal affairs agent to call him in. What he had to say might not undo the damage, but it would finally tell the truth. The press conference wasn't held on the courthouse steps or in the polished briefing room of the Attorney General's office. It was held on the school campus where Raymond had spent the last 3 years walking the same halls, rehearsing in the music room, waiting in line at the vending machines, living a life that now felt like it belonged to someone else. The auditorium was full, not just students and staff, but journalists, local officials, even teachers from neighboring schools who had followed the story from the beginning. It wasn't about politics anymore, not even about law. It was about visibility. A teenager dragged into the center of a system he didn't ask to confront, now standing in front of cameras with the weight of a city pressing on his chest. Raymond stood backstage, staring at the curtain. His hands trembled slightly, but not from fear, from pressure, the kind that came when people expected you to become a symbol overnight. He wasn't trying to be brave. He wasn't trying to be anyone's hero. He just wanted to speak the truth that had been twisted since the moment those officers stepped out of their car. Leona stood beside him, adjusting the collar of his shirt. She didn't say anything for a moment, just fixed the edge and gave his wrist a gentle squeeze. "You don't owe them anything," she said softly. "Not the cameras, not the headlines, not even me." Raymond nodded, swallowed once, and stepped forward. When the curtain pulled back, the applause started. Not polite, not formal, but real. It rolled across the room like a wave of permission. It was okay to speak. People were here to listen. He approached the mic slowly. For a second, the silence felt louder than any cheering could. He glanced out across the crowd. Dozens of phones pointed at him, but behind them were faces, familiar, concerned, hopeful. He cleared his throat. "A week ago, I was arrested," he began, his voice shaking slightly. "Not because I broke the law, but because someone decided I looked like I could." The room stayed still. Not a whisper. "I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was walking home. I had just bought guitar strings. That's it. They didn't ask what school I went to. They didn't ask what was in my bag. They asked who I was, and when I didn't answer fast enough, they decided I was a problem." His voice steadied. "They threw me to the ground, put their knee on my back, laughed while I struggled to breathe. I told them who my mom was, and they laughed harder, because they thought power only looked like them." He paused. Someone in the audience sniffled. "I want to say I'm okay, but I'm not," he said. "Not because of the bruises or the broken phone, but because of how quickly I became someone they could lie about. They said I resisted. They said I matched a description. They said it was routine, but nothing about it was routine for me." He reached into his pocket, pulling out the crushed remains of his phone, the one Officer Grant had stepped on. He held it up. "This is what they left me with. Broken glass, scrambled messages, a piece of my voice crushed under someone's boot. That's what it felt like that day. Like I didn't matter." He lowered the phone. "But I do matter. And I'm saying that out loud, because if I don't, they'll keep doing this to people who don't have a camera, or a lawyer, or a mother with a badge." At the edge of the stage, Leona blinked slowly. Not a single tear, but the way she breathed told everything. "I don't want to be famous," Raymond said. "I want to go back to playing guitar and walking home without being watched. But until then, I'm not staying quiet. Because if they can do this to me with everyone watching, imagine what they do when nobody's looking." He stepped back. Silence held the room for 3 full seconds. Then the applause came again. Louder, heavier. It wasn't just clapping. It was release. It was people letting go of the tension they'd held since the first clip hit the internet. The next day, everything moved faster. Officer Keene submitted his written statement to Internal Affairs. In it, he confirmed the body cam edit, the false call, the conversation about shaking the kid. He admitted he had stayed quiet and said he was ready to testify under oath. Leona's legal team filed a formal complaint to the Department of Justice, citing patterns of unlawful searches, racial profiling, and procedural violations by 8th Precinct officers spanning 5 years. 3 more victims came forward, 2 of them underage at the time of their arrests. Their stories echoed Raymond's with eerie accuracy. No charges, no reports, just stopped, questioned, humiliated, and released once the damage had been done. Meanwhile, Reese completed his report on the digital manipulation of the body cam footage. He submitted the full chain of evidence to both the press and the court, with one clear conclusion: the edit wasn't accidental. It was a cover-up. By the end of the week, Officer Grant was placed on unpaid leave. The department issued a vague statement citing ongoing investigation, but the public wasn't interested in delays. They wanted change. Protests spread to other precincts. Legal groups began calling for an overhaul of the city's stop-and-search policy. News outlets ran side-by-side comparisons of Grant's official report and the recovered video. The contradictions weren't subtle. And Raymond, he returned to school, not as the boy they once underestimated, but as the voice they now couldn't ignore. The first day back, a teacher stopped him in the hallway. A quiet man who usually didn't speak much. He looked at Raymond for a long second and simply said, "Thank you." Raymond gave a small nod and kept walking. He didn't feel brave. He didn't feel powerful. He felt tired. But he also felt seen. And sometimes that was enough to begin again. A week later, the hearing room at the City Oversight Committee building was packed to the walls. Television crews were restricted to the hallway, but their cameras rolled nonstop, catching every official, every lawyer, every uniformed officer who walked through the doors. A line of protesters gathered outside, holding up signs that read, "Body cams are not optional. Silence is violence, and accountability means action." The city hadn't felt this much pressure since the last major scandal rocked the police department a decade earlier. But this time was different. This time, the victim had a voice, the truth had a timeline, and the woman leading the charge wore the state seal on her chest. Leona sat at the front table of the hearing chamber, her posture still, her expression unreadable. To her left sat Clark, and beside him, Arjun Desai, the civil rights attorney now working directly with her office on long-term policy enforcement. In front of them were 3 microphones, a small stack of documents, and a thick folder labeled simply testimony. Across from her sat members of the committee, state legislators, police auditors, and city-appointed investigators, each one flipping through notes, checking facts, aware that anything they said today would be clipped, shared, and dissected by millions by nightfall. The lead question came from Senator Helena Brooks, a sharp woman known for her straightforward style. "Madam Attorney General," she began, "thank you for being here. Let's start with what brought us here. Your son Raymond, what happened to him was both disturbing and sadly familiar. What steps has your office taken in direct response to this event?" Leona leaned into the mic, her voice calm, unwavering. "We opened a formal misconduct investigation into Officers Grant and Keene. We obtained both the official body cam footage and the altered version submitted to the precinct archive. With help from digital forensic specialists, we confirmed deliberate tampering of time codes and audio. We've submitted that report to the Department of Justice for further action. Additionally, my office has initiated a full review of the 8th Precinct's arrest history over the past 5 years, focusing on racial disparities, repeated complaint patterns, and unfiled incident reports." Senator Brooks nodded. "Do you believe this is isolated to just these 2 officers?" "No," Leona replied. "I believe it's systemic. Grant and Keene were just the ones who got caught. There are likely dozens of victims whose names were never written in a report, whose stories were never believed. Raymond was just unlucky enough to be the one they picked on the wrong day." Gasps rose lightly from the audience behind her. She continued without pause. "This isn't just about bad officers. It's about a system that has no consistent oversight, no mandatory review of body cam footage unless someone complains, and no real consequences for misconduct unless there's video. If that student across the street hadn't filmed the arrest, my son would have been buried under a false narrative. No news coverage, no outrage. Just a kid with bruises and a record that didn't belong to him." A committee member leaned forward. "And your response now? We're drafting legislation that would require body cam footage to be auto-archived in full, uneditable, within 60 minutes of any physical detainment," Leona said. "We're also proposing an independent civilian board with subpoena power to review misconduct claims, outside of internal affairs, which, as we've seen, has failed repeatedly." Another member asked, "And what about the officers involved? What are you seeking?" "Termination, decertification, and, if the federal review supports it, criminal charges." There was a heavy pause in the room, not because her words were too bold, but because no one could argue with them anymore. After the hearing recessed, Leona stepped outside into the marble hallway, where reporters swarmed. She gave no comment. She didn't need to. The hearing was live-streamed. The world had already heard. Back at home, Raymond sat on the couch with his guitar resting against his leg, watching the hearing with his friend Malik, who had been quiet the entire time. The screen froze for a second as Leona stared directly into the camera and said the words, "My son could have died for nothing more than looking like a suspect to someone who never asked a question." Malik whispered, "Your mom's a force, man." Raymond didn't smile. "She's always been like that. Just now people are watching." That evening, Raymond received an invitation, an unexpected one. The local university's music department wanted him to perform at their Justice Awareness event. They weren't asking for a speech. They wanted him to play. He stared at the email for a long time. His fingers hadn't touched the strings properly in days. Every time he picked up the guitar, the tension from that day returned. The weight on his back, the sound of the cuffs. But maybe if he played again, he could reclaim some piece of what was taken. He replied with a simple yes. Meanwhile, Officer Keene sat at a long oak table in an internal affairs interview room. Across from him were two agents, a recorder blinking red. His statement, written in sign, sat between them. "I didn't stop him," Keene admitted, his voice low. "I didn't throw the punch, but I didn't stop it. That's the part that keeps me up." "Why now?" one of the agents asked. "Why speak up?" Keene looked down at his hands, then back up. "Because that boy didn't deserve it," he said. "And I don't want to be the kind of man who stays quiet just because it's easier." The red light blinked steadily. No turning back now. The system had always relied on silence to survive, but this time too many people were speaking, and the silence was cracking. The university auditorium was bathed in soft amber lighting as students, faculty, and guests filled the rows of seats. It was a night meant for reflection, a community event hosted by the Department of Social Justice and the music program, originally intended to feature local performers and a panel on civil rights history. But over the last week, the event had transformed into something larger. Raymond had become more than a name in the news. He was now a symbol of survival, of resistance, and of the quiet strength it takes to stand back up after being crushed. Backstage, Raymond sat alone with his guitar on his lap. He tuned each string slowly, methodically, his fingers stiff from a week of tension. This would be his first time performing since the arrest. The same instrument that once brought him peace had been silent, locked in its case like it too was processing the weight of what had happened. He could hear the crowd beyond the curtains, hushed voices, the occasional clearing of throats, soft rustles of jackets. A young student volunteer knocked gently and peeked in. "They're ready whenever you are," she said with a kind smile. Raymond nodded, stood, and took a breath before walking toward the stage. Each step felt heavy but certain. When the curtain parted and the lights found his face, he didn't flinch. The crowd quieted. He sat on a simple wooden stool in the center of the stage. No microphone, no speech, just him and the guitar. He began to play. The first few notes were slow, almost hesitant, as if the strings were waking up with him. But then his hands moved with more confidence, and the sound grew warmer, fuller. The melody wasn't familiar. It was something new, something he had written in pieces over the past week, a blend of sorrow and quiet rage, of mourning and dignity, the kind of music that didn't need words to explain its meaning. By the time he reached the final chord, a soft hush settled over the room. There was no immediate applause, just stillness. Then slowly, hands began to clap. Not like a celebration, but like a promise. After the event, students lined up to speak with him. Some just wanted to shake his hand. Others thanked him for being brave. One girl simply pressed a folded note into his palm and walked away. He opened it later in the car. "You reminded me I don't have to stay silent. Thank you." Across the city, Officer Grant sat alone at a metal desk inside the internal disciplinary unit. Unlike Keene, he hadn't turned anything in voluntarily. He had been summoned. He had tried to resist at first, claiming politics, claiming misinterpretation. But the evidence was too overwhelming. The uncut footage, the leaked audio, Keene's statement. Even precinct logs showed discrepancies in his reports going back years. He didn't speak much during the interview. His lawyer answered most of the questions, often repeating, "We have no comment at this time." But silence wasn't a shield anymore. The public release of the full internal report, titled "Misconduct in Uniform: A Pattern of Abuse and Evasion," had arrived in the inboxes of every major news outlet that morning. It included damning evidence, digital footprints of video tampering, false statements on arrest records, and communication logs showing informal language used between officers to flag Black or Latino individuals without any official cause. And right there in the report, under Officer Grant's profile, was a line no police officer ever wanted to see. Recommendation, termination, immediate. City Hall issued a public statement by noon, confirming that Grant was suspended without pay pending full dismissal after a federal review. Keene had agreed to cooperate fully under limited immunity in exchange for his testimony against both Grant and two other officers now under preliminary investigation. The dominoes had begun to fall. Leona sat in her office that night, the city lights reflecting on the floor-to-ceiling windows behind her. She had barely slept in days, but she felt no fatigue. Her phone buzzed on the desk. A message from Clark. Dozens more coming forward. We're setting up a legal support unit. Another message blinked in from Arjun. City Council requesting you draft oversight policy draft personally. They want it in writing from you. She responded with a simple, on it. Then she opened the file on her desk. Raymond Hill versus 8th Precinct, City of Crestfield. A civil suit, a public one. Not for revenge, not for money. For record, for legacy. For proof that silence could be broken and the cracks could become light. As she leaned back in her chair, she thought of something Raymond once told her after a music recital years ago, when he was still small and wore a bow tie that kept twisting sideways. People clap when you hit the right note, he had said, but sometimes they don't even know it's right. They just feel it. She closed her eyes. He had hit the right note. Now the city was finally listening. The courtroom was smaller than Leona expected. Not the kind of space fit for sweeping justice, marble pillars, or grand declarations. Just four walls, a row of pew-style benches, and the low hum of air conditioning that never quite reached the corners. Yet it was in this modest room where the final truth would begin to unfold. Not through speeches or viral videos, but through sworn testimony, cross-examination, and evidence that could no longer be buried. Raymond sat beside her at the plaintiff's table, dressed in a charcoal jacket, his tie neatly knotted. He had asked to be present during the hearings, not because he wanted to watch Grant squirm, but because he wanted to see it through. This wasn't just about proving a point. It was about reclaiming something. His story had been told by strangers for weeks. Now he would watch it be written in the one place lies were sworn away. The defense table sat quietly across the aisle. Grant was there, flanked by his attorney, a man who had once defended city officials in a housing discrimination case. Grant didn't look angry now. He looked like a man waiting for a storm he thought might pass over him, like it always had. The judge entered, and the room rose. Once seated, the clerk began reading the case aloud. Hill versus Officers Grant and Keene in the 8th Precinct under the City of Crestfield. Allegations include unlawful detainment, use of excessive force, falsified arrest report, tampering with digital evidence, and racial discrimination. The first witness called was Clark. Calm and direct, he walked the court through the timeline, the false report, the recovered footage, the quiet rush to edit the video before it hit archives. He presented copies of body cam logs with timestamps proving the video had been altered after initial capture. He submitted a written statement from Reese confirming the tampering and a digital map that traced every movement of the file within the precinct's internal network. Then came the testimonies of others, victims who had once been dismissed, ignored, or too afraid to speak. Each took the stand with a different story, but the same outline. Stopped without reason, accused without evidence, spoken to like criminals when no crime had been committed, humiliated in their own neighborhoods. A college senior named Nico, soft-spoken but clear, told the court about the night he was pulled from his car after being mistaken for someone else. He had never filed a complaint. What was the point, he said. They laughed at me when I asked for a badge number. A mother, Janice Myers, recounted how her 14-year-old son was pushed against a wall and searched while waiting for a school bus. They told me he fit a description. I asked what description. They said young, dark, and fidgety. That was it. Each word etched a clearer picture of a pattern, one that went beyond Raymond, beyond even Grant. This wasn't a rogue officer problem. It was a culture wrapped in silence and protected by policy gaps. Leona took the stand on the third day. The courtroom leaned in as she spoke, not with rage, not with personal pain, but with the measured force of someone who had lived in the law long enough to see where it broke most often. My son was not just detained, she said. He was profiled, forced to the ground, lied about in official reports, and used as a pawn in a system designed to protect its own first. She presented hard evidence, the edited footage, the recovered call logs, the recorded statement from Keene, now part of the official record. The judge asked questions. The defense tried to poke holes, but Leona's answers didn't waver. "When I walked into that precinct, I wasn't just a mother," she said. "I was a witness to what happens when power is unchecked, and I did not walk out quietly." That night, Raymond sat on the edge of his bed, the courtroom still echoing in his head. He had listened to hours of stories, pages of records, names of people who had been silent for too long. And for the first time, he didn't feel like a victim. He felt like a link in something greater. Leona knocked softly and stepped in. "Tired?" He nodded. "But it's different now." She smiled faintly. "You did good today, just being there." "Was it enough?" She sat beside him. "Sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's quiet, and it takes its time. But when it comes, it's permanent." He looked down at the guitar near his desk, the one he hadn't touched in days, then back at her. "You think they'll really change the system?" Leona rested her hand on his shoulder. "They don't have a choice anymore." Back in the courtroom, Grant was finally called to testify. The judge reminded him he was under oath. His lawyer advised him to answer only what was asked. Grant adjusted the microphone, cleared his throat, and began to speak. And for the first time, under the full weight of the law he had once twisted, he had no shield left. Only the truth. And witnesses. Officer Grant sat stiff in the witness chair, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, knuckles pale against the smooth fabric of his suit. The courtroom felt smaller now, hotter. The air seemed to press inward with every second of silence that passed after he was sworn in. The judge gave a subtle nod to the plaintiff's side. Arjun Desai stood, buttoned his jacket, and approached the witness stand with a quiet confidence. "Officer Grant," Arjun began, "you've served on the police force for how long?" 14 years, Grant replied, his voice clipped. "And in those 14 years, how many citizen complaints have been filed against you?" Grant hesitated. "I don't have that number memorized." Arjun nodded. "Then allow me to refresh your memory. According to internal affairs records, there were 12 formal complaints. 6 involved allegations of racial profiling. 3 involved excessive force. 2 were for unlawful searches. 1 involved intimidation of a witness. Do you deny these were filed?" Grant shifted. "Complaints are common. That doesn't make them valid." "No," Arjun agreed, "but patterns do, and yours is very clear." The defense attorney objected to the tone. The judge allowed it but warned the witness to answer directly. "Let's talk about March 17th, Arjun continued. "You approached Raymond Hill without a call, without a suspect description, and without any reported crime. Why?" "We were patrolling." He was acting suspicious. "Sitting at a bus stop with a shopping bag is suspicious?" "He was wearing a hoodie, looking around nervously." Arjun raised an eyebrow. "So your suspicion was based on his clothing and his glances?" "That's part of situational awareness," Grant said flatly. Arjun stepped closer. "Or was it based on his skin color?" "Objection." The judge allowed it. Grant didn't answer right away. His jaw clenched. "I don't profile people. I go by behavior." "Behavior that never included a weapon, a threat, or resistance," Arjun fired back. "And yet, you tackled him to the pavement, placed your knee on his back, and reported that he resisted arrest, all without a call from dispatch or a complaint from the store." Grant exhaled slowly, as if trying to hold on to whatever remained of his version of the story. "You also claimed in your report that he became verbally aggressive," Arjun continued, flipping to a page. "Yet in the unedited body cam footage, he says, and I quote, 'Did I do something wrong?' That was his first question to you. Is that aggression?" No answer. "You stomped on his phone during the arrest. Why?" "I didn't stomp on it." Arjun turned to the monitor where a frame from the surveillance video was displayed. Grant's boot clearly crushing Raymond's phone. "This photo suggests otherwise." The courtroom shifted. A murmur rolled through the seats. Grant looked up at the judge. "It wasn't intentional. I didn't even notice it." "Convenient," Arjun said, voice tight, "especially since that phone contained video of the arrest that contradicted your report." More shifting in the room. "Tell me, officer," Arjun asked finally, voice low but sharp, "when you pressed that boy to the ground, Did you think anyone would question you? Grant didn't respond. Did you think, like the dozen times before, that no one would challenge your report or pull the footage or call you out for what you'd done? Still no answer. Arjun leaned in slightly. You weren't just confident, you were certain. And that's what makes this case so dangerous. You knew the system would protect you because it always had. Grant's lawyer called for a recess. The judge granted it, but not before saying, "You'll answer the rest of these questions after break, officer." As Grant left the stand, he looked smaller than when he had walked in. Like the shield he had worn, authority, uniform power, had cracked open and left only a man exposed. Outside the courtroom, reporters lined up. The footage of the cross-examination had already gone viral. Social media had exploded with reactions, clips of Grant stumbling over his words, the photo of the crushed phone, and the phrase Arjun had repeated, "You thought no one would question you." It had become a slogan overnight. T-shirts, posters, tweets, not anymore. In a quiet room at City Hall, the mayor sat watching the footage. His advisors hovered nearby, nervous. He had once dodged calls for police reform, citing budget restraints and union resistance. Now the pressure was unmovable. "We're past damage control," one aide whispered. "If we don't announce a civilian oversight bill by next week, you'll be standing in front of an empty podium." The mayor sighed, picked up the phone, and dialed. "Get the Attorney General on the line," he said. "Tell her I'm ready to talk policy." Back at home, Raymond watched the hearing replay with his music teacher, Mr. Lennox, who had been one of the first to believe in him. They sat on opposite ends of the couch, both quiet as Arjun's voice echoed from the speakers. "He's not walking away from this," Mr. Lennox said. Raymond didn't respond right away. He turned to the window. Outside, two boys from the neighborhood were skateboarding down the block, laughing, cutting across the sidewalk where Raymond had once been pinned. "They will," Raymond said quietly. Lennox frowned. "What do you mean?" "The ones like him. Maybe not Grant, but others. They'll walk away next time if nothing changes." Lennox nodded slowly. "So what now?" Raymond looked down at his hands. "Now we make sure it changes." And for the first time in weeks, he didn't feel like he was reacting to the story. He felt like he was helping write the ending. It rained again the morning the city council met to review the emergency policy proposals drafted by Leona's office. Unlike the usual drawn-out government sessions, this one had urgency in its bones. The public gallery was full. Every seat, every wall, every spare corner was packed with people. Community leaders, teachers, students, pastors, activists, mothers holding photographs of sons who never made it home. Some clutched signs. Others simply wore shirts with a message across the chest. "We are Raymond." Leona stood before the council with a calm that didn't shake, even under the weight of history pressing behind her. The document in her hand was 42 pages long, tight, uncompromising, legally bulletproof. It included mandatory, time-stamped archiving of all body cam footage, complete civilian access to misconduct files, an independent review board with investigative authority, and automatic suspensions for officers under verified abuse complaints. No delays. No red tape. Behind her sat Clark, Arjun, and several members of her policy team, each of them knowing that what happened in this room could either be a turning point or just another promise made in the heat of outrage and forgotten once the cameras dimmed. The mayor entered late. He walked with the look of a man who'd finally stopped resisting the inevitable. He nodded to Leona on his way to the front, not with pride or warmth, but with respect. The kind of respect born when someone realizes the person they once dismissed is now the only one who can save them. The council chair, Elena Marquez, called the session to order. "We are gathered here in response to the events surrounding the unlawful arrest and mistreatment of Raymond Hill and the discovery of long-standing misconduct within the 8th Precinct. Today we review the Attorney General's proposed reforms." Leona approached the podium and began. "I will not spend this time repeating what we all already know. A boy was profiled, assaulted, and lied about by those sworn to protect him. But this isn't just about him. It's about the silence we allowed to stretch between incidents like his. We've heard the names before. We've seen the headlines. We've buried too many truths in committee folders." She paused, letting the words settle. This proposal is not about punishing one officer. It's about preventing the next. She walked the council through each measure: how officers would no longer be able to police their own misconduct, how residents could report anonymously without fear, how audit reports would be made public every quarter. Every detail was backed by data, legal precedent, and the weight of lived experience. Marquez leaned forward. "And you believe these measures can be implemented immediately?" "They must be," Leona said, "because the problem is not waiting. Neither can we." An older councilman tried to raise concerns about morale within the police force. "We risk making officers feel hunted," he said. Leona turned to him slowly. "No one fears accountability except those who know they'll be found out." A murmur of approval moved through the gallery. The mayor didn't flinch. A motion was made. A vote was called. In a matter of minutes, what had once been just an idea on a page became law. 6 council members voted yes. 2 abstained. None dared say no. It was done. The next day, the headlines changed from controversy over police brutality to historic reform passed in wake of teen's arrest. Raymond's name was still in the articles, but not as a victim anymore. Now he was called a catalyst, a voice, a spark that lit a fire. That evening, he sat on the roof of his apartment building, watching the lights of the city blink below. His guitar rested beside him, silent but ready. Beside him sat Leona, finally without a phone in her hand. "They passed it," he said, still in disbelief. "They had to," she replied. He looked at her. "Would they have, if I wasn't your son?" She hesitated, then said, "Maybe not." He nodded. "So what about the ones who don't have someone like you?" She turned her head. "Now they do." Down below, protesters had turned into volunteers. What began as anger had transformed into action. Legal clinics were being organized at community centers. Support groups formed to help others come forward. Local youth programs began inviting attorneys to teach kids their rights. A city had been shaken awake, and it wasn't going back to sleep. Officer Grant was no longer on the force. The Civilian Review Board had ruled in favor of Leona's recommendations. His decertification was pending state approval, and a federal inquiry was underway. Keene, now suspended, had submitted additional names and internal communications, helping uncover a network of similar abuses in neighboring precincts. The cleanup had only just begun. Leona received a call the following morning from the Department of Justice. They confirmed they would be launching a full civil rights investigation into Crestfield's policing practices, naming her a cooperating authority. She hung up the phone, leaned back in her chair, and let herself breathe for the first time in weeks. Across the city, a little girl was walking home from school with her older brother. A patrol car slowed near them, but this time, it didn't stop. No questioning, no search. Just a nod from the officer driving. Respectful, distant, careful. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was change. Either way, it was different. And for Raymond Hill, young, black, and no longer invisible, that difference had cost him something, but it had given a city something back: clarity, accountability, and the first step towards something better. 3 months later, the city of Crestfield was no longer the same, not because the skyline had changed or because the streets had suddenly become perfect, but because people had stopped pretending. What had been exposed in those weeks hadn't been a one-time mistake. It had been a system built to protect itself, caught off guard by a boy who refused to shrink, a mother who knew how to wield the law like a blade, and a city finally too tired to look away. Raymond stood at the same corner where it had all started. The sidewalk was clean now. The wall he had been pushed against had been repainted. The music store, Mr. Avery's shop, had placed a photo of Raymond in the window, smiling, holding his guitar, with a small sign underneath that read, "He was always just a kid with music in his hands." He didn't come here often, but today was different. He wasn't alone. A crowd had gathered behind him: teachers, students, families, city workers, even a few off-duty officers who'd quietly shown their support since the reforms passed. They were here for the unveiling of a new community mural, commissioned by a coalition of local artists and funded by the Civil Rights Initiative that had been created in the wake of his case. The mayor stepped up first. He kept his words brief. not out of disinterest but humility. Crestfield owed this moment, and we owe every moment after this to stay changed. Then it was Leona's turn. She stood behind the podium in a simple black coat, her eyes scanning the crowd, her voice steady. My son's face was slammed into the sidewalk not far from where I stand, and it wasn't the first time this street held injustice. But today we give it a different memory, not to erase what happened, but to mark that we did something about it. Finally, Raymond stepped up. There was no script in his hand. He hadn't rehearsed. He just looked at the faces in front of him, some familiar, some not, and began to speak. I used to walk the street without thinking. Then one day I got thrown to the ground, and suddenly every step I took started to mean something. At first I was scared to take another one. I wanted to hide, pretend it didn't happen, but the world didn't let me forget, and neither did I. He looked toward the wall still covered with the tarp. When they asked if I wanted to be part of the mural, I didn't want my face on it. I didn't want to be a symbol. But then I realized this isn't just about what happened to me. It's about what won't happen to the next kid, because someone finally said, "Enough!" The crowd clapped, not loud, not showy, just firm, steady, like an agreement. The artist stepped forward and pulled down the tarp. Underneath it, a breathtaking mural stretched across the brick. A row of young faces, all shades of brown, black, and gold, each one looking forward, not afraid, not angry, but resolute. In the center was a pair of hands, not handcuffed, not clenched, but open, palms upward, holding a broken badge in one and a blooming flower in the other. Above them were the words, "Seen, heard, protected." Tears ran silently down cheeks. Some held hands, others simply looked on, wide-eyed. Later that evening, Leona returned to her office, now quieter than it had been in months. The stack of reform proposals had turned into implementation reports. The Civilian Review Board was fully operational. The police union had reluctantly accepted the oversight. Officers were now required to complete new training modules on constitutional rights, de-escalation, and community trust before rejoining patrol. And most importantly, 2 precinct captains had been replaced, quietly but undeniably. She poured herself a cup of coffee and walked to the window. Outside, the streets looked normal. People moved like any other night, but under it all was a shift, a silent acknowledgement that power, once questioned, could never again be used the same way. She looked at her phone. A text from Raymond had come in. Played the song again. This time it felt right. She smiled, not broadly, but with something deeper, a quiet peace. Meanwhile, in a small studio apartment downtown, Raymond sat with his guitar resting on his lap. He was alone but not lonely. Not anymore. He strummed slowly, the notes rising into the evening air, like a memory rewritten. His song didn't have lyrics yet. It didn't need them. The melody spoke for itself, soft at first, then strong, steady, proud, and far from that cold sidewalk where it all began, a new future played in rhythm, built note by note, by the boy they tried to silence, and the mother who made sure the world listened. If this story moved you, give it a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories coming soon.